Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at sources that draw a really stark historical warning and apply it directly to a modern geopolitical flashpoint, Venezuela. Our mission is to analyze the parallels between the Vietnam War and any potential U.S. involvement there. We're going to unpack why top military experts are sounding the alarm that this could become a decades-long quagmire.
And that warning is so crucial. It's not about debating if the U.S. military could win a battle. It's about the immense difficulty of establishing, full long-term control. The sources make this foundational point that great powers often see themselves as global leaders who create events.
Right, that others have to react to.
Exactly. But when the U.S. decides to create an event with military action, history shows the consequences they can spin completely out of control.
Okay, let's dive right into that, starting with the historical blueprint. Vietnam. The sources remind us that the trigger for the big U.S. conflict there in '64 was the Gulf of Tonkin incident. But what's critical for our deep dive here isn't the justification or the lack of one. It's the mechanical failure of achieving a quick victory.
Precisely. Let's look at the initial strategy. It began with just overwhelming air power. The U.S. launched these massive bombing campaigns in August 1964. And from a purely military standpoint, the initial goals were met.
Defenses destroyed, government hit hard.
Yes, it sounds like a decisive win on paper.
But you said the air assault failed to achieve control. So what happened next?
The timeline. The timeline is the real insight here. The attacks happened in August 64, but the sources show it took about 7 months.
7 months.
Until November 1965 for U.S. ground troops to actually enter Vietnam safely and start large-scale operations. That gap right there is the difference between a military strike and actually controlling territory. Air power destroys, it doesn't occupy. And once they were committed on the ground, it was anything but quick. We're talking nearly 20 years trying to get out of that conflict. The cost is just staggering.
And the sources put a number on that.
They do. Around 58,000 U.S. troops lost. And the economic cost. Nearly $1 trillion in today's money.
$1 trillion.
So this history is the ultimate caution. Just attacking a country or even removing its president does not mean you've won or that you control it.
That is a huge anchor point for this discussion. So let's pivot. How closely does the situation in Venezuela today match that Vietnam blueprint? I mean, the situation feels urgent. We're seeing reports that the U.S. Secretary of Defense said an attack could begin at any time. And yet our sources also point to serious friction at home. These deep disagreements between Democrats and Republicans about military action. So why the hesitation with all that U.S. military might?
Well, that hesitation comes from a very sober military assessment. And it boils down to one decisive factor: geography.
The terrain itself.
The terrain. If you look at Venezuela's physical landscape, the coast, the dense jungles in the interior, military analysts describe the conditions as very similar to those of Vietnam.
Okay, and that has immediate military implications.
It immediately dictates the kind of fight it would be. That kind of terrain makes guerrilla warfare highly effective. It lets militias just melt into the environment. They're almost impossible to track or eliminate from the air.
So planners have to ask themselves.
Exactly. If air power can't handle this dispersed resistance, then the only other option is a full-scale land invasion. And the sources call that extremely complex and incredibly high risk.
But wait a second. Modern air power is a whole different ballgame from 1964. We've got drones, stealth fighters, precision targeting.
Yeah.
Shouldn't that make it easier to go after guerrilla fighters?
You'd think so, but advanced tech is really good at finding large, fixed targets. A military base, a command center, things like that.
Not a guy in civilian clothes with a rifle in the jungle.
Precisely. It fails against asymmetric warfare. You're bombing a country, not an army. When the enemy wears normal clothes, uses tunnels, and vanishes into the trees after an attack, that multi-billion-dollar stealth fighter its use is limited.
So you control the skies, but not the streets.
Or the jungle paths. And that's why a full-scale air attack hasn't happened. The military planners know they cannot bomb their way to full control.
And the sources also point out that even if, say, President Maduro were removed, that problem of control doesn't just go away.
Absolutely not. The internal political reality is key. The core power structure, his party, the militias, they're all deeply entrenched. A successful airstrike might decapitate the leadership.
But the body keeps fighting?
Exactly. A new leader could pop up, maybe someone even more anti-U.S., and you haven't changed the fundamental power balance at all. The sources confirm that Venezuelan militias are already engaged in this kind of guerrilla warfare.
And they're getting help.
Yep, support from neighboring countries and and indirect cooperation from China.
Which brings us to the strategic risk and the real motivation for an intervention. The question shifts, doesn't it? It's not, can the U.S. win a fight, but can the U.S. bring the country fully under its control?
And that need for full control is where you find the economic driver. Venezuela has massive oil and gold reserves. Huge.
But you can't get to them if the country's not secure.
You can't exploit them on a large scale. You can't run pipelines or operate refineries if they're constantly being sabotaged by guerrilla resistance. So full control, which means boots on the ground to stabilize and secure those assets. That's the real objective.
An objective that might cost more than the assets are even worth.
It's a real possibility, and this is where the big geopolitical warning comes in. The U.S. National Security Council has cautiously used a specific term for this. They're worried it could be a Chinese trap.
Okay, a Chinese trap. What does that mean exactly? It sounds ominous.
It's not about a direct military fight with China. A Chinese trap is a strategy of asymmetrical conflict. It's designed to exhaust U.S. resources, its attention, its global credibility.
I see. So Russia is bogged down in Ukraine.
Right, and both China and Russia are strategically motivated here. If they can draw the U.S. into a prolonged quagmire in Venezuela, another 20-25 years, that serves their long-term interests perfectly. They benefit most from a U.S. stalemate.
So instead of fighting the U.S. directly, they fund the resistance, turning Venezuela into a sinkhole for American troops and money.
That's the idea, and their support isn't just financial. The sources detail a pretty significant foreign military presence already there. Russia reportedly has military assets in Venezuela.
Like what?
Aircraft and advanced S-300 air defense systems, which, to be clear, is one of the world's most capable air defense systems. It makes achieving air superiority much, much harder, and at the same time, China has installed powerful radar systems.
Whoa, okay, so that raises a completely different high-stakes risk. If the U.S. were to actually succeed, if they captured Venezuela, they'd get their hands on all that Russian and Chinese military tech.
It would be a massive technological intelligence coup. Absolutely. The U.S. could potentially use reverse engineering on a captured S-300 or on those Chinese radar systems.
And find all their weaknesses.
Find critical vulnerabilities? Yes. It could weaken their defense capabilities across the globe. And that is a risk that neither Beijing nor Moscow can really tolerate.
So the calculus for them is, it's incredibly complex. They win if the U.S. gets stuck in a long, costly jungle war. But they also have to prevent the U.S. from winning outright and getting access to their military secrets.
That's it. That technological risk is why they're avoiding direct confrontation, but it's also why they're highly motivated to give robust, indirect support to the resistance. They're investing in a prolonged stalemate.
They're counting on the jungle, the militias, and the high price of total occupation to keep the U.S. from succeeding.
Precisely. For all these reasons, the consensus among military experts is that it's unrealistic to think the U.S. can easily capture and control Venezuela. They're all predicting a long, costly war with a very uncertain outcome.
And the final warning from the sources is, once you're in, it's very hard to get out.
History shows there's little chance of withdrawing without achieving your objectives, no matter how high the economic or human cost gets.
So where does this leave us? We have a situation where the geography is perfect for resistance, the economic prize requires total costly occupation, and our global rivals are set up to benefit only from a long-term American failure.
Yeah.
It really makes you reconsider what military superiority even means today.
And the sources really pose the question for all of us. How realistic are these expert predictions, and how closely will reality follow them, especially when, U.S. political institutions are so divided on what to do? But let's leave you with a final thought on this. If all the sophisticated air power, stealth technology, and financial superiority we had weren't enough to prevent a 20-year quagmire in Vietnam, what fundamental assumptions about modern war are being challenged by the prospect of a similar low-tech jungle conflict today, especially when the resistance is quietly funded by global rivals who only profit from a prolonged U.S. failure? It really forces you to ask if technology can ever truly defeat determined, asymmetric resistance when the terrain and the global stage are both aligned against you.